Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to Introspective, a podcast where we explore the future and what it holds. Go ahead and grab your snacks, kick back, and relax while we dive into today's topic. I'm your host, Jim Guillermo. For today's episode, we do have a special guest. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jacob.
Hi, Jacob. Thank you for coming on today. This episode would not be possible without our sponsor, Audible. Audible is the leading provider of audiobooks and have over 180,000 audiobooks to choose from. Visit audible.com for one free audiobook using the code BT2022. This is the best place for audiobooks and I cannot recommend it enough. Once again, thank you to Audible for sponsoring this podcast. So, Jacob, do you actually know why I'm interested to why I got into civil engineering in the first place?
I don't. You did talk a little bit about your interests in infrastructure and general transportation, but you didn't really get into it.
Yeah. So it actually started a lot in my childhood. I don't know. It's like when I grew up, I had a lot of Legos, had like these Lincoln, the Lincoln logs, had a lot of those.
I do remember.
I used to love building with those and just making whatever I could. And then I think back in first grade, actually, I had a project. It was like an About Me project, and one of the things we had to do was actually say what we wanted to grow up. And at the time, I actually said I wanted to be a roller coaster architect. I wanted to be the person designs roller coasters, basically.
And that's dope.
Yeah,
I feel like civil engineering is just designing roller coasters, but for adults. Like, come on.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I'll be honest. For a first grader, it was a little bit ambitious, but
Hey, but you know
yeah.
what? As a kid, you really want to be ambitious. It's better to have an interest and have something you want to pursue later, possibly down the road, than to not know what you want to do at all.
Yeah.
And I think, as a civil engineer, you're just essentially you're building roller coasters, except they're in the form of on-ramps.
Yeah, in the form of on-ramps and bridges, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, I just really wanted to, I was just really into designing stuff. There was also a portion of my life, I mean, even now, where I was just, super into space, super into, NASA and rockets, designing stuff.
Yeah.
And, I remember looking into it in maybe, 6th grade or something like that, finding out that, engineers are, the people who build stuff, basically design stuff. And from there, I don't know, it just slowly evolved, and then eventually I just got super interested in just civil specifically, which is just, yeah, basically the infrastructure of just everywhere.
I definitely fell down a similar path, where not necessarily Legos and NASA, but I did have that shared interest of general infrastructure, especially when it came to road and transportation. Because when you look at things today, no matter whether you're in a private personal vehicle or if you're on public transportation, it all falls into the hands of civil design. And I think as someone that but has no other choice but to live in a civil environment, I think it's important to be able to be involved in that environment. And so I can definitely see where you're coming from.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, later on, obviously, right now I'm in college, majoring in civil engineering, but I really didn't know where to take it from here. So I just, started searching things up, and there were these sections I already knew kind of what I wanted to go into, but I'll be honest, although I was majoring in it, I was clueless as for specifics at all. So one of the one of the things I looked into specifically was road design. And when I was looking to that, I obviously there was some stuff where I already assumed you had to take into account the systems around it, the traffic flow, things like that, how everything would work together, basically the general infrastructure just around it, making sure it doesn't impact anything. And I was looking into that. I found a lot of information about it, and I was interested in road design. I still do like the idea of it. I think it is definitely something I might go into, but I'm not sure. It's
What about a broader stance? Not so much road design in general, because in a way that could be limiting. I'm not saying that that's a dead end. It really isn't. But have you ever considered, exploring taking a step back and looking at the wider world of transportation?
I definitely did actually. That was actually another section I looked at. It was just transportation in general. So like I was looking into that, so I found out it obviously includes like basic stuff like like traffic control systems, railways, public transport, right? But what I
Yeah.
actually found out, apparently this also oil pipelines and space transport both fall
What?
under this. I okay I
What? This could be considered civil infrastructure.
yeah, but I mean but this was under transportation. I
Oh,
mean because I guess when transportation you obviously think of like transporting like people, right? Transporting like
right.
just driving things like that. But it
Yeah.
also transportation as a whole under civil it actually also includes the transportation of cargo, which is
Interesting.
yeah. So that's obviously where like the oil pipelines come in, right? So like you have to take into things. You have to take like traffic patterns, good transportation, general design of everything into account when you look at transportation.
For sure. I think that's a good. Um, I think that's a good tangible connection because I've struggled with trying to understand why civil engineering was so closely connected to environmental engineering, and I didn't really understand it early on. But the more that I looked into it, and the more that I learned about the industry and the discipline itself, I definitely can see the connections. And hearing this from you now, I didn't even know that the transportation of oil and other fossil fuels and even cargo in general, like you mentioned earlier, I didn't know that that fell under transportation. I that's news to me, but it totally makes sense, and it also totally makes sense why environmental and civil engineering go hand in hand. A lot of the civil engineering, like we've talked about before, definitely falls into the mitigation and the treatment of, say, wastewater runoff. I always joke about how civil engineering is essentially just wastewater management, and I'm sure you're familiar with that as
Oh
well.
yeah,
And I
of
think
course.
that yeah, and I think that I can absolutely see how that goes hand in hand to environmental engineering because then, and where civil engineers want to make plans and designs of infrastructure, environmental engineers have to do an assessment. They have to do an environmental impact assessment, and they want to make sure that whatever infrastructure does not impede the runoff of water, for example, or wildlife. So I never knew that connection, but that totally makes sense now.
And like speaking of infrastructure too, one thing I wanted to look into was like another like thing I wanted to look into was like general infrastructure of basically just cities, everything around it. Like one thing I mean right off the bat that I learned is that it's actually specifically called civil infrastructure, which I mean it makes sense obviously, but it's just something I didn't know at the time. And, I mean again I mean basically I knew a lot of it because it's just the balance of different systems, electricity, gas, oil, wastewater, obviously, sewage, all that stuff. It was basically looking to the balance of all of that, and the whole thing with it was just basically trying to figure out how to make everything work together, how to make everything flow smoothly, and how to like keep keep everything from like impeding with I guess public life, right? Making sure every like public life for everybody walking around is just as smooth as possible, like because like, you walk around, you obviously don't notice like I mean, you notice maybe like electric lines above you and stuff like that, but it's not like you notice the water lines running below you, oil pipelines running below you, everything that's like behind the scenes that keeps everything running smoothly, right? And
Absolutely.
that's basically what I found out. It's like
I think
civil, yeah.
I think to build off of what you said, I think it's in general, if you do not notice the infrastructure around you and you don't notice how the interworkings of things, if it doesn't stick out to you, I think that means that the civil engineer did his job, and he did his job well. Because if it does not affect you, and if you're not sort of taken aback, or you're not affected in any way by the design of something, if it isn't dangerous or anything like that, if everything flows smoothly and you don't even notice the design, I think that means that the civil engineer did his job. And I noticed that a lot, just walking around everywhere, from sea retaining walls to design of crosswalks and things like that. And I think, um, I think I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to bring it up. Uh, I wanted to bring that point up where if you do not notice a design, I think that's a pretty good indication that the civil engineer did his job well.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's like, yeah, like you said, like, I'll be walking around doing my everyday business. I won't even notice half the things that are going on. But it's like after looking into this and really exploring this, I walked around again like the next day, and I looked around, and I just really noticed like everything that was going on, how many things that are going on, and how they're all done like to a pretty good extent to the point where you obviously don't notice it. And
Absolutely.
I think it's just an amazing thing. So like that specifically, that's like what I'm pretty interested in. And then um, pretty much yeah, that was my exploration in this. I'll be honest. I'm not as confused, although if anything, I might be even more confused because now I know better. But I think while researching, obviously, you find new things to explore. You
Yep.
look at other things. So I found a couple other things. Like I looked a bit into like the space transport. I'm not gonna go too much detail into it. I mean, I found it interesting, but not for me. And
Yeah, I
yeah.
think space transport is. I think that's a whole nother level, and I think that goes even beyond the reaches of civil engineering. Just because I think civil engineering as a discipline, it's meant to cater to the greater population, and because those usually occur in metropolitan areas, the central areas where a lot of people tend to live, work, and play. I think a lot of that design falls onto the shoulders of civil engineers because we have to make it accessible and practical. So I think space travel, space transportation. I think certain aspects could be shared with civil engineering, but to a point, I think that may be beyond the reaches of the confines of civil engineering.
Oh
But that's
yeah,
just an.
for sure.
I haven't read into it too much.
Yeah.
Um, I I noticed that nowadays um, bureaucracy, the bureaucracy that follows civil engineering can be quite tough. What is your sort of uh, approach when it comes to the political aspect of civil engineering and how politics and legislation can possibly impact your work?
I mean, while looking into it, honestly, I mean, I didn't into that specific, I guess, section that much, but I know for a fact, like, politics and everything, it for sure um, affects me directly. Or, I mean, not right currently. I mean, it does affect me currently, but when I'm going to be working in the field I'm going to be working in, obviously, it will affect me directly. And although it's like me as a person alone, I mean, I'm not going to be in any position of power or anything. I can't really have my voice. Like, if something's like going to directly affect us negatively, obviously me alone, I can't do anything by myself. But I'm sure if a big enough issue really pops up, I'm sure it won't just be me, but also other people voicing their opinions and just keeping everything at a balance.
I think I bring that up because as a civil engineer, a lot of what you deal with is publicly funded. So a lot of projects, if 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 I may, I'm going to bring up in Hawaii we have a public transportation project that's been going on for quite a while. It's a light rail system that we have running. It's gone over budget many times. I think it's $7 billion over budget now, or $9 billion, which is ridiculous. It was supposed to be finished a couple of years ago, and it's still under construction. They've been changing and altering their routes so many different times to shorten it to try and stay within budget. But that obviously hasn't happened, and this has created a very big visible division among the residents in Hawaii, and especially those that will be affected, those on Oahu, especially those businesses that line the property that was either acquired back via what's that called, common rule or something like that, where cities and government owned land sort of they can sort of invoke a certain law that essentially requires those businesses to give the land back to the state. Um, but I ask about the political aspect because as civil engineers, we tend to deal with, as I said earlier, a lot of publicly funded projects. And with publicly funded projects, you have to have legislation passed in order to pass budgets. You need to have town hall meetings and hearings of local communities just so they can voice their concerns pertaining to those projects. And so I was, I just wanted to see your opinion on that because um, other disciplines, say mechanical or even electrical engineering, where a lot of them may go into the private sector um, and work with big private companies, they don't really have that impedance of bureaucracy and those publicly funded ideas. So I only wanted to bring it up because as a civil engineer major myself, I really wanted to look into that aspect of it because I think that really affects our work, and especially when it affects our budget and our ability to not only design but to implement systems that we deem appropriate and necessary.
That's something I'll definitely be looking into, and it's something that we can talk about on next week's episode. Thank you again, Jacob, for coming on the show today. You're always welcome back. I'm your host, Jim Guillermo, and this has been Introspective.